All right, so this set of Google Slides is going to be on your notes for today, but I just wanted to go over it. And I'm going to post this video too. So in class, we're going to, if you're in the virtual meeting, we're going to play a Kahoot to practice the vocab. And then today we're going to be talking about the difference between the preterite and the imperfect, which are both past tenses but are used for different specific things. Okay. On the warm-up, I asked you to give me the endings for preterite and for imperfect for the regular endings, and these are the endings. So if you want to pause the video here and make sure that this is in your notes, that might be a good idea, or else you should have this in your notes. So the first table is AR preterite endings. The second table is ER and IR preterite endings for regular verbs, right? And we've been through these already. And then the last thing we did was imperfect endings, which is the past tense that's used for ongoing or repeated actions in the past. And this was a little bit easier because there weren't very many regulars in this tense. So there's the AR at the top and the ER and IR at the bottom. So if you wanted to pause this here and write this down in your notes, if you don't have it, that might be a good idea. So when do you use each one? That's what we're going to be working on. So that's the new concept, okay? So the imperfect, which is a tense that we just did, that tense is used to describe habitual or repeated events in the past. So things like background information where you can't exactly pinpoint like it was a one-time thing on a timeline, that's when you're going to use the imperfect. And the preterite is used to describe particular specific events with a definite beginning, middle, or most especially end. So more of a one-time event. And there are some words that'll help you determine whether or not you use the imperfect or the preterite. So the imperfect, which is again habitual or repeated or ongoing actions that happened in the past. So for example, if you said, when I was 6 years old, in that sentence in Spanish, you would use the imperfect because that's an ongoing thing. It wasn't a one-time event, right? But you're not 6 years old now. We know that was in the past. So we would use the imperfect. So these are some words that kind of give you a hint that it might be in the imperfect. The word siempre, which means always. Los sábados, which implies that this is something that happened every Saturday, so that would be a repeated action. Todos los días, again, that's every day, so again, it's a repeated action, right? And a menudo, which is often, repeated action again. All of those imply repetition. All right, and the preterite, which is the past tense that we spent such a long time on because there were so many irregulars, again, that describes generally a one-time event. So it's used with expressions like una vez, which means once, el sábado pasado, which means last Saturday. So one specific day this event happened, as opposed to every Saturday, which we just saw. Un día, one day. So it's kind of telling you it's a one-time thing. Esta mañana, this morning. So basically, that's kind of a hint that you're going to describe one specific event that happened this morning, not something habitual or repeated. And anoche, last night, kind of does the same thing as esta mañana. So all of these kind of imply that event only happened one time in the past. And here's some more that kind of let you know that you're probably going to be using the preterite tense. De repente means all of a sudden, so that kind of implies a one-time thing, right? Not repetition. And anoche we already saw, la semana pasada, last week, so it's like a definite time. The rest of these are all sort of definite periods of time where there was a one-time event and not repetition. So again, preterite, well-defined, especially with defined as having an end point, okay? Action or event that describes at a specific point in time. And then the imperfect is ongoing repetition. And in English, we don't really have a way to communicate this tense in English, so we do things like was or were and ing, or we use the phrase used to for the imperfect to imply that it was a habitual thing or a repeated thing or an ongoing event in the past. So these, and you're going to want to put this in your notes, okay? The imperfect is used to describe these things because they're mostly background information. So time, I know it seems like time is a one-time thing, you know, but it's considered background information. So if you wanted to say it was April 10th, you would say era. You would use the imperfect for that. Telling time in the past, eran las 8 de la noche, not fueron, which would be the preterite. Weather, again, that's background information, right? And by the way, if you think of the trajectory of a story or a novel, generally at the beginning of a story or a novel, you get a lot of background information. You get descriptions of characters, physical and characteristic type of descriptions, right? You get setting information. You get places where people live or things like that. At the beginning of a novel, you're generally going to get the imperfect in Spanish because that's background information and it's not a one-time thing. It was in the past, but it's ongoing, right? So weather would be one of those things. If you were describing the weather at the beginning of a story, that would be in the imperfect because it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing thing that happened in the background, right? So hacía mal tiempo would be there was bad weather. Jovia, it was raining. And again, I told you in English we do this by saying was or were and ing. So Jovia would be it was raining. Location, again, that's background information, right? Yo estaba en la escuela, I was at school. It's not a one-time thing, it was an ongoing thing. Someone's age, I just kind of talked about that. So if you're describing a character in a story or whatever and giving their age, that's background information. It's not a one-time event, right? So el profesor tenía 30, entre 30 y 35 años, so we're guessing their age, I guess, between 30 and 35. All right, physical appearance. Again, background information, not a one-time thing. You know, you could say, when I was little, I had red hair, but it wasn't just a one-time event having red hair. It was ongoing. So, era un hombre alto, he was a tall man, right? Llevaba un suéter gris, he was wearing, again, that was an ing in English, was wearing a gray sweater. All right, people's emotions tend not to be a one-time thing. They tend to be ongoing, at least over probably an unspecified period of time. Attitude is kind of related. Quería aprender español. He wanted to learn Spanish. All right. So think about this one. What do you think? If these phrases were in Spanish, do you think you would use the preterite or the imperfect? So last week I went to the store. So if you think about this, I went to the store. Was that an ongoing, sort of undefined thing that was happening in the past, or was it a one-time thing? I think that would be a one-time thing, right? I went to the store one time. That was a specific event, and that would use the preterite. And this is, you've already had a hint on this one, actually. All of a sudden, the door flew open. Well, all of a sudden tells us that that one is probably in the preterite. We went swimming every day. So every day implies repetition, and that ing thing in English also implies that we're going to use the imperfect. So that would be the imperfect. It was cloudy. That's weather, right? We just talked about that. That's background information. That would use the imperfect. And then last August, I went to Mexico City. Well, I went to Mexico City is not an ongoing event or an event that repeats or a habitual event. It's a one-time thing, right? So for that one, you would use the preterite. You might want to pause the video here and take notes on this. So saber, which means to know. If you knew something in the past, uh, you would, you know, I always knew when the teacher was mad, for example, right? That would be in the imperfect. But to find out something, if I use the preterite with saber, I'm basically implying I knew it in that instant. In other words, I found out. Okay, so it changes the meaning a little bit. And querer, same thing. To want, it's usually an ongoing emotion, right? So that would usually be in the imperfect. But if somebody uses the preterite quise, it means more that I tried to do something. Poder, to be able to. Um, Again, that's sort of I guess it's more of a condition, in, but that would generally be in the imperfect because it would be ongoing. So pude would be I succeeded in. It's preterite. It's a one-time thing. All right. So it does change the meaning a little bit. And conocer, which means to know a person. Um, Conocía a su familia. I used to know his family. Conocí a su familia would be I met his family. So that would be a one-time thing, and that changes the meaning on that. So you might want to write down in your notes saber, querer, poder, conocer, and write the difference in meanings between the imperfect and the preterite. And by the way, again, these slides are also linked on your Schoology folder for today. So if you don't want to stop the video and do this here, you can go through the slides yourself. Okay. All right. And then in Bosses, you guys are doing a practice, a pretty short practice. It's activity 8. You are going to need to conjugate those verbs, though. You're going to need to decide if you think you would use the preterite or the imperfect for that sentence. And then you're going to need to look at what the subject is and conjugate it depending on what the subject is. Okay, so just keep going until you get them all right.